The first snowplow blade I ever bent was on Patricia Abernathy's mailbox post, and honestly, looking back, I should have seen that as a warning sign of things to come instead of just an insurance claim. My name's Dan Wright, and I own a 2015 Ford F-350 with a 9-foot Fisher plow mounted on the front, which around my neighborhood makes me about as popular as a guy handing out free pizza during a blizzard. I run a small side business plowing driveways and parking lots for local businesses in Maple Ridge, our town about 40 minutes outside of Cleveland. Winters here aren't a joke. We get lake-effect snow that can dump 2 feet overnight, and when that happens, my phone starts ringing before I've even finished my coffee. I live in a subdivision called Birchwood Commons, which has an HOA that, for the most part, left me alone for the first 3 years I lived there. Then Patricia Abernathy got voted onto the board as community liaison, which is a fancy way of saying she appointed herself queen of passive-aggressive notices taped to mailboxes. Middle-aged, always wearing a puffer vest even in August, and possessing what I can only describe as an almost supernatural ability to find something wrong with your lawn, your trash cans, or in this case, my truck. It started on a Tuesday in late January, the kind of gray, bone-cold day where your breath freezes to your scarf, and the sky looks like it's deciding whether to dump 6 inches or 12. I just pulled into my driveway after finishing a job at the Gas and Go on Route 9 when I saw Patricia standing at the end of my driveway like she'd been waiting there since sunrise. She had a clipboard. Nothing good ever comes from Patricia and a clipboard. "Dan Wright," she said, like she was reading it off a warrant. "We need to talk about the cul-de-sac. Our subdivision has this little dead-end circle at the back called Willow Court. 6 houses tucked around a patch of grass with a decorative lamp post the HOA loves to point to in the welcome brochure. The town plows the main roads, but technically the cul-de-sac itself falls into a gray area of maintenance responsibility that the HOA has always just sort of paid a contractor for." "What about it?" I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. "Gary quit," she said, referring to the guy who'd plowed Willow Court for the last 4 winters. "Moved to Florida. Can you believe that? Middle of winter and he just leaves us high and dry." "That's rough," I said, and I meant it, because Gary was a good guy who probably just got tired of Patricia's clipboard. "So the board has decided," she continued, and I want you to notice how she said the board like it was some untouchable governing body and not 3 retirees and herself who met in someone's basement once a month, "that since you have a truck with a plow, you'll be handling Willow Court from now on." I actually laughed, which in hindsight was probably not the diplomatic move. "Patricia, I run a business. I don't work for free." "It's not free," she said, sniffing like I'd insulted her personally. "It's a community responsibility. You live here, we all pitch in." "Do the other 5 houses in Willow Court pitch in? Do they plow anything?" She waved her hand like that was a ridiculous question. "That's not the point. The point is you have the equipment, and it's your obligation as a homeowner to use it for the good of the community." Now, I want to be clear here, because this is important. Nowhere in our HOA covenant, which I had actually read cover to cover when I bought the house because I'm the kind of guy who reads things before signing them, does it say a homeowner is required to provide free snow removal services with his personal commercial equipment. There's a line about maintaining common areas, but that's always been interpreted as the HOA hiring someone, not commandeering a resident's business truck. "I'll think about it," I said, which was code for absolutely not, and I walked into my house before she could clipboard me into a corner. That should have been the end of it. It was not the end of it. 2 days later, we got hit with the storm the weather guys had been hyping all week. 14 inches by morning, drifting snow, the whole 9 yards. My phone rang at 5 a.m., and it wasn't a client. It was a number I recognized from the City of Maple Ridge Public Works Department. Here's something I should explain. Because I run a plow business and I've got a truck that can handle heavy loads, the city occasionally contracts me during major storms to help clear priority routes, specifically the roads leading to the hospital and the two elementary schools that double as emergency shelters. This isn't some side gig. It's an actual signed seasonal agreement I have with the Maple Ridge Public Works Department, complete with a contract, a hotline number, and a guaranteed hourly rate that's honestly better than half my private clients pay. When the city calls during a big storm, I go, because that's literally what I signed up for, and because if I don't show up, actual emergency vehicles could get stuck. "Dan, we need you on Route 9 and the hospital loop," the dispatcher said. "This one's bad." "On my way," I told him, already pulling on my boots. "I want to paint a clear picture here. My truck was booked. Contractually, legally on record booked for the city of Maple Ridge, hours before Patricia Abernathy even opened her eyes that morning. I plowed for the city from 6 a.m. until almost 2 in the afternoon. Route 9, the hospital loop, two side streets that had ambulances getting stuck the night before. It was miserable, exhausting, cold to the bone work, but it mattered. I got paid for it, sure, but there's also something satisfying about knowing you kept an ambulance from getting stuck in a snowbank on the way to save somebody's grandmother. When I finally rolled back into Birchwood Commons around 2:30, snow-crusted and running on gas station coffee, I found 17 missed calls on my phone. 14 from Patricia Abernathy, 2 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be the HOA's official line. 1 from my neighbor Carl, who lives 2 doors down and who I later learned had tried to warn me. I also found a very different scene waiting at Willow Court. See, while I was out clearing routes to the hospital, Willow Court had gone completely unplowed. 14 inches of snow doesn't care about anybody's feelings, and by the time I got home, that cul-de-sac looked like a scene from a disaster movie. One of the residents, an older guy named Mr. Delgado, had tried to back out of his driveway and gotten his sedan stuck at an angle blocking half the circle. Another resident's propane delivery truck, which was supposed to refill her tank that morning, straight up couldn't get down the court and had to turn around, meaning she was going to be low on heat during a night that was forecast to drop into the single digits. Patricia naturally decided this was entirely my fault. I found her standing in my driveway again, except this time she wasn't alone. She had 2 other board members with her, a nervous guy named Frank who I think just wanted to go home, and an older woman named Sylvia who kept looking at her watch like she had somewhere better to be, which given the temperature she absolutely did. "Where were you?" Patricia said, each word its own sentence, her breath coming out in furious little clouds. "Working," I said, stepping out of my truck. "I had a job." "You had a job, you had a job. Dan, Willow Court is a disaster zone. Mr. Delgado's car is stuck. Karen Foss's propane truck couldn't get in and she is going to freeze tonight because you decided your little side hustle was more important than your neighbors." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. "Patricia, I never agreed to plow Willow Court. I told you I'd think about it. You never got a yes from me. You knew we were counting on you. I knew you assumed you could use my truck without paying me, which isn't the same thing." Frank, the nervous board member, shifted his weight and mumbled something about maybe circling back to this conversation later, but Patricia was not having it. "This is unacceptable," she said. "As a member of this community, you have a responsibility. I was plowing for the city," I said, cutting her off. "Route 9, the hospital loop. I have a contract with Maple Ridge Public Works. My truck is under a legal agreement to prioritize city emergency routes during declared snow events, which today was. I don't get a choice about that. It's signed, it's binding, and frankly, it's more important than a decorative cul-de-sac." Patricia's face did this thing where it went red and then kind of purple, like she was a human thermometer for rage. "Nobody told me about any city contract. I don't owe you updates on my personal business arrangements," I said. "But I do have paperwork if you want to see it." "I want to see it," she snapped. So I actually pulled out my phone right there in the freezing driveway and showed her the digital copy of my Maple Ridge Public Works agreement, the one with my signature and the city engineer's signature, and the little seal at the bottom that makes government paperwork look official. Patricia squinted at it like she was hoping it would evaporate if she stared hard enough. "This doesn't change the fact that Corinne Foss doesn't have heat," she said finally, apparently deciding that if she couldn't argue the facts, she'd argue the feelings. "Then maybe the HOA should hire an actual contractor instead of trying to guilt a homeowner into working for free," I said. "Which, by the way, is what you're supposed to be doing with our HOA dues in the first place." That landed harder than I expected, because Sylvia, the older board member, actually turned and looked at Patricia with an expression I can only describe as, "Wait, what?" "We do budget for snow removal," Sylvia said slowly. "There's a line item for it. $1,200 a season." "There's supposed to be," Patricia said quickly. "Gary was cheap. Since he left, I've been handling the account." I watched Sylvia's eyebrows climb about an inch. "Handling it how?" "That's not important right now," Patricia said, and I swear the temperature in that driveway dropped another 5 degrees just from the tension. "Right now we have a crisis. Corinne Foss needs propane, and Mr. Delgado's car is blocking the street, and I need Dan's truck." "My truck," I said, "is currently thawing out its hydraulics in my driveway after 8 hours of city work, and I am going inside to eat something that isn't a granola bar. If you want, I can plow Willow Court tomorrow morning as a paid job, standard rate, same as any client." "You want to charge the HOA?" Patricia looked genuinely scandalized, like I'd suggested charging a toll to use the sidewalk. "I want to charge for a service I provide. Yes, that's generally how services work. This is exactly the kind of self-interested behavior that gives homeowners a bad reputation in this community," she said, and I nearly laughed out loud because, coming from Patricia Abernathy, that sentence had some serious nerve to it. I didn't plow Willow Court that night. I did, however, call my buddy Reggie, who runs a small landscaping and snow removal outfit, and asked him as a favor to swing by and at least clear a path so the propane truck could get in the next morning. Reggie's a good guy. He owed me one from a job I'd covered for him back in October, and he came through around 6 that evening, clearing just enough of the court that Corinne Foss's propane delivery could actually happen before her tank ran completely dry. Mr. Delgado's car got towed out by AAA an hour later. Crisis technically over. Patricia's ego, however, was just getting started. The next morning I woke up to find a laminated notice taped to my front door. Laminated. She'd actually laminated it, which tells you something about how much free time this woman had. It read, in bold red letters, "Notice of community negligence. Resident Daniel Wright has failed to fulfill his obligation to the Birchwood Commons community during a declared weather emergency, resulting in hazard to residents including risk of frozen pipes and vehicular entrapment. This notice will be entered into the resident's file and may result in fines per HOA Bylaw Section 4, Article 2. I read it twice, mostly because I couldn't believe the audacity, and then I did what any reasonable person would do. I photographed it, dated it, and sent it to my brother-in-law, who happens to be a real estate attorney. His name's Mike, and he's dealt with more HOA nonsense than anyone should have to in one lifetime, mostly because half his clients are people trying to get out from under overreaching HOA boards. He called me back within the hour, laughing so hard I had to ask him twice what was so funny. "Dan, there's no Bylaw Section 4, Article 2 in your HOA covenant," he said. "I've read your covenant. I helped you review it when you bought the house, remember? There's no such thing as a mandatory snow removal obligation for individual homeowners regarding common areas outside their own property lines. She's making this up. So she can't actually fine me. She could try, but if she does, you'd have grounds to challenge it at the next board meeting. And honestly, depending on how blatant this is, you might have grounds for something more serious if she's been misusing HOA funds like that other board member implied." That got my attention. Sylvia mentioned there's a line item for snow removal, $1,200. Patricia said Gary was cheap, but she never really explained where that money's been going since he left. That, Mike said, is exactly the kind of thing you want documented before you bring it up publicly. Now, I'm not a detective, but I am a guy who likes things to make sense, and something about Patricia's reaction in my driveway had been bugging me. The way she deflected so fast when Sylvia asked about the budget. So I decided to do a little digging, the boring, legal kind of digging, which mostly meant showing up to the next HOA board meeting with a notebook and paying very close attention. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a modest brick building at the front of the subdivision that mostly gets used for the annual holiday party, and apparently, monthly gatherings where 5 to 15 homeowners argue about mailbox paint colors. I got there early and grabbed a seat near the front, right where Patricia would have to look at me the whole meeting. She started, as usual, with a rundown of minor community business, a reminder about holiday decoration removal deadlines, a complaint about someone's dog barking, before finally getting to what she clearly considered the main event. "I'd like to address the incident on Willow Court," she said, not looking directly at me but very obviously talking to me. "As many of you know, we experienced a serious weather emergency last week, and unfortunately one of our homeowners, dramatic pause, who possesses commercial snow removal equipment, chose not to assist the community during that emergency." A few heads turned toward me. I stayed quiet, waiting. "This resulted in a dangerous situation," Patricia continued, warming up now, clearly enjoying the stage. "An elderly resident's vehicle became stuck, and another resident nearly ran out of heating fuel in sub-zero temperatures. I believe this community needs to have a serious conversation about what we expect from our neighbors during emergencies." I raised my hand, and when she reluctantly acknowledged me, I stood up. "I'd like to respond to that," I said, "and I'd also like to ask a follow-up question about our snow removal budget if that's all right." Patricia's expression flickered just for a second like a light bulb about to die. "Go ahead." "First, on the Willow Court situation. I was contracted by the City of Maple Ridge Public Works Department to clear priority emergency routes during that storm, including the road to Maple Ridge General Hospital. I have a signed agreement with the city, dated back to October, well before this storm happened. I wasn't given advance notice by anyone here that Willow Court's regular plow contractor had quit, and I was never asked in a formal capacity, with compensation, to take over that responsibility. I was simply informed in my own driveway that it was now my obligation." A murmur went through the room. I saw Mr. Delgado, sitting a few rows back, nod slowly. "Second," I continued, pulling out a folder, "I'd like to understand where the $1,200 budgeted annually for Cul-De-Sac snow removal has gone this season, since Gary, the previous contractor, left in early December, and no replacement service was hired before the January storm." The room got very quiet. Patricia's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That money is allocated for various community needs," she said finally, which is the kind of answer that immediately makes everyone in a room suspicious. "Could you be more specific?" Sylvia asked from the board table, and I could tell from her tone that she'd been wanting to ask this question for a while and was grateful someone else had opened the door. "I don't have the exact figures memorized," Patricia said, her puffer vest practically vibrating with tension. "I'd have to check the records." "That's fine," I said. I actually filed an open records request with the HOA management company last week, since our covenant requires financial transparency to members upon request. I should be getting those records within the next few business days. I want you to picture the exact moment a woman realizes she's been caught, because that's what happened on Patricia Abernathy's face right then. It wasn't dramatic, no gasping, no fainting. It was more like watching a balloon slowly lose air. Her shoulders dropped an inch, her eye twitched. "I think," Frank said carefully, "we should probably table this discussion until we have the full financial picture." "Agreed," Sylvia said quickly. Patricia tried to regain control of the room by moving on to the topic of holiday lights, but nobody was really listening anymore. The meeting ended about 20 minutes later, and as people filed out, Mr. Delgado stopped me by the door. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "She's been running this HOA like her own personal kingdom for a year now. Nobody's ever pushed back." "Well," I said, "I've got a truck full of paperwork and a brother-in-law who's a lawyer. Somebody had to." The records request took 9 business days, which felt like forever in HOA time, but honestly moves pretty fast for local paperwork. When they finally landed in my inbox, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee and read through them twice just to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding anything. Turns out, Patricia had indeed been handling the account since Gary left, exactly like she said. What she conveniently left out was that instead of hiring a new plow contractor for Willow Court, she'd been quietly redirecting portions of that snow removal budget toward what the records vaguely labeled Community Beautification Initiative, which, upon closer inspection of receipts, turned out to be a fancy way of saying she'd bought a very expensive set of decorative wreaths for the clubhouse entrance, a new set of patio furniture for board meetings, and most damning of all, reimbursed herself $400 for administrative mileage despite living, by my count, about a 9-minute walk from the clubhouse. I photographed every relevant page, organized them into a folder, and sent copies to Mike, Sylvia, and on a hunch, to Corinne Foss, the woman who'd almost run out of propane, figuring she deserved to know exactly why there'd been no contractor to keep her driveway clear. Corinne, it turned out, was not the type of woman to sit quietly on information like that. Within about 6 hours of receiving my email, she'd apparently forwarded it to half the Cul-De-Sac and started a group chat that, according to Carl, who showed me a screenshot later, included messages like, "She spent our snow money on wreaths," and "I nearly froze so she could get new patio chairs." By the next morning, there was a petition circulating, an actual physical petition on a clipboard, ironic given Patricia's own weapon of choice, calling for an emergency board review of HOA finances and a vote on Patricia's continued position as community liaison. I didn't start the petition. I want to be clear about that. Corinne Foss did, with help from Mr. Delgado and, surprisingly, Frank, the nervous board member, who I think had been looking for an exit from Patricia's orbit for a while and finally found the nerve. The emergency meeting happened the following Saturday, and I have never in my life seen the Birchwood Commons clubhouse that full. People who I didn't even know lived in our subdivision showed up. Someone brought a thermos of hot chocolate and was pouring cups for people standing in the back because there weren't enough chairs. Patricia sat at the board table looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, possibly Antarctica, possibly the surface of the sun. Sylvia opened the meeting by laying out the financial discrepancies plainly. No dramatics, just numbers on a projector screen that Frank had apparently helped compile. Wreaths $340, patio furniture $620. Mileage reimbursements over 4 months, totaling nearly $400 for a woman who lived a 9-minute walk from the clubhouse. All of it pulled from the snow removal and general maintenance budget. All of it never approved by a full board vote. All of it, according to Mike, who I'd invited to sit in as an advisor since he actually understands HOA law better than anyone else in that room. Potentially a violation of the HOA's own bylaws regarding expenditure approval, and depending on how the numbers ultimately settled, possibly something the state attorney general's office dealing with nonprofit and HOA fraud complaints would want to know about too. "This is a witch hunt," Patricia said, standing up so fast her chair scraped loud against the floor. "I have given years of my time to this community, unpaid, and now you want to drag me through the mud over patio furniture." "Nobody's dragging you through mud, Patricia," Sylvia said calmly. "We're asking you to explain unauthorized expenditures from a budget that was supposed to keep our streets safe during winter storms." A budget that, when it wasn't there, resulted in an elderly man's car getting stuck and a woman almost running out of heat in freezing temperatures. "I was doing my best," Patricia said, her voice cracking with what might have been real emotion or might have been performance. "Honestly, at that point I couldn't tell anymore. Nobody appreciates what I do around here. I organize the events, I handle the complaints, I deal with everyone's problems, and this is the thanks I get." "You didn't organize a snow contractor," Karen Foss said from the crowd, arms crossed, "which was literally your one job that mattered this winter." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the radiator clicking in the corner. "I move, Mr. Delgado said, standing up slowly, that we hold a formal vote to remove Patricia Abernathy from her position as community liaison, effective immediately, pending a full independent financial review of the past year's HOA budget." "Seconded," Karen said immediately. Frank, looking pale but resolute, raised his hand. "I'll third that if that's how this works. I should have said something months ago. I'm sorry I didn't." The vote happened right there, by show of hands, because our HOA bylaws, which I'd actually now read even more thoroughly thanks to this whole mess, allow for emergency board removal votes with a simple majority of homeowners present at a properly noticed meeting. Out of roughly 40 homeowners crammed into that clubhouse, 36 voted for removal, 2 abstained, 2 voted no, and one of those 2, weirdly enough, was Patricia's own sister-in-law, who I later learned lived 2 streets over and had been pressured into supporting her. Patricia Abernathy was removed from the Birchwood Commons HOA board that night live, in front of what felt like the entire neighborhood, holding a laminator's worth of unresolved dignity. She didn't take it well. She stood up, gathered her clipboard and her purse, and delivered one last line before storming out into the cold parking lot. "You'll all regret this when nobody's here to keep this neighborhood together." Nobody responded. The silence that followed her out the door was honestly more satisfying than anything I could have said. Now, you'd think that would be the end of the story. HOA drama concluded, tidy little bow on top. Everybody goes home and shovels their driveways in peace. But this is real life, and real life has a way of adding one more complication just when you think things are settling down. About a week after Patricia's removal, the independent financial review that the new interim board, led by Sylvia, had commissioned came back with some numbers that made the earlier wreath-end patio furniture stuff look like small change. Turns out Patricia had also been quietly approving invoices from a landscaping company for extra services that, according to the actual landscaping company's records when Sylvia called to verify, had never been performed. Snow removal invoices for services on days there hadn't even been snow. Lawn treatments billed for months when the ground was frozen solid. All told, the review found close to $6,000 in questionable or outright fabricated expenditures over the past 14 months, some of which appeared to be funneled through a landscaping business that, when Mike did a little digging of his own, turned out to be owned by Patricia's cousin. At that point, this stopped being a simple HOA governance issue and became something the police needed to be involved in. Sylvia, on the advice of the HOA's management company and Mike, filed a formal complaint with the Maple Ridge Police Department, and the case got handed over to a detective who specialized in local fraud cases, a guy named Detective Ruiz who, I have to say, seemed almost amused by how thoroughly documented everything already was by the time it landed on his desk. "Usually these HOA fraud cases take months to build," he told me when he came by to ask a few follow-up questions about the Willow Court incident, since my timeline of events with the city plow contract ended up being useful for establishing exactly when the snow removal budget failure became apparent. "You all basically handed me a completed file." "We had a very motivated group chat," I told him, and he laughed. Patricia was formally charged about 3 weeks later with theft by deception and falsifying business records, both of which are real crimes in Ohio when you're talking about that amount of misappropriated funds, especially funds belonging to a legally incorporated homeowners association. Her cousin, the landscaping company owner, was charged as well for submitting fraudulent invoices. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, which moves faster than any snowplow I've ever driven, that she ended up taking a plea deal that included restitution to the HOA and a suspended sentence with probation, largely because it was a first offense and the amount, while significant, wasn't massive enough to warrant serious prison time. She also, obviously, was permanently banned from ever serving on an HOA board in the state of Ohio again, which felt like a fittingly specific punishment for a woman whose entire identity had apparently been built around clipboards and community authority. As for Willow Court, the new interim board, in one of their first official acts, approved hiring an actual licensed snow removal company for the rest of the season, paid fairly, with a real contract, no homeowner trucks required. Mr. Delgado's driveway got plowed like clockwork every storm after that. Corinne Foss never had another close call with her propane tank, and honestly, she became something of a neighborhood folk hero for starting the group chat that cracked the whole thing open. Me, I went back to my regular business, plowing for the city during big storms, taking on private clients on the side, minding my own driveway. But something had shifted in Birchwood Commons. People who used to avoid eye contact at the mailbox started actually talking to each other. Sylvia, now serving as the acting community liaison until formal elections in spring, started an actual community text alert system for storms, so nobody would ever again be blindsided by a plow contractor quitting with no notice. Frank apologized to basically everyone individually for staying quiet as long as he did, which I thought was decent of him, even if it was a little excessive given he wasn't the one who actually did anything wrong. About a month later, in February, we got hit with another storm, smaller than the January one but still enough to matter. My phone rang early that morning, same as before, the city calling me out to Route 9 and the hospital loop. I got dressed, got my coffee, and headed out into the cold, snow crunching under my boots in that satisfying way it does when it's cold enough to squeak. On my way out of the neighborhood, I drove past Willow Court and saw the new contractor's truck already out there, clearing the cul-de-sac clean, lights flashing yellow in the gray morning dark, Mr. Delgado's driveway already done, a fresh path cut right up to Corinne Foss's front door. Nobody flagged me down with a clipboard. Nobody demanded my truck. It was just quiet, cold, and working exactly the way a neighborhood is supposed to work, where everybody contributes what they can and nobody gets bullied into providing free labor because someone with a laminator decided they were entitled to it. I plowed the hospital loop that morning in under 2 hours, easier than the January storm, lighter snowfall, better prepared roads. When I got back home that afternoon, there was a small basket on my porch from Corinne Foss with a thank you note and a thermos of what turned out to be genuinely excellent hot chocolate. For keeping the hospital road clear, the note said, and for not backing down when it mattered. Also, sorry about almost freezing that one time. That was not your fault at all. I laughed out loud standing there on my porch in the cold, steam rising off the thermos, snow still falling lightly around the streetlights. Patricia Abernathy's laminated notice, by the way, I kept. It's framed now, hanging in my garage right next to my plow controls, a little reminder that sometimes the most absurd threats come with the most ridiculous packaging, and that the best defense against somebody trying to bully you with fake authority is just refusing to fold, keeping your paperwork straight, and letting the truth do the heavy lifting. Winter in Maple Ridge is still brutal most years. The roads still ice over, the propane trucks still occasionally struggle to get down narrow streets, and somebody's mailbox post probably isn't long for this world every time I take a corner a little too fast with the plow down. But Birchwood Commons runs different now. Real contracts, real transparency, actual accountability, and a community that finally figured out that the loudest person with a clipboard isn't always the one actually looking out for everybody else. As for my truck, it's still under contract with the city every winter, still gets called out whenever the snow really starts coming down, and it never, not once since that January, gotten roped into free labor for a cul-de-sac that isn't even mine to plow. Some lessons, once you learn them the hard way, really do stick.